just going to talk about the changes to the GTAG within GTM, what it means, why it's happened, and what you need to do about it. So, quick bit about me. So, I'm founder of MeasureMinds. We're a digital analytics agency focusing on kind of Google Stack. Also do lots of cookiebot, OneTrust setups and implementations, and we're kind of a sort of finalist for some growth awards for GTM grader and .ai, and also GA4 migrator. And I've updated my Google GTM guidebook. I'll post a link to that in chat in a moment. Yeah, we're not taking on any new work at the moment, just because we're too busy with all the Black Friday kind of stuff. But these are some of the clients we've worked with over generally tend to be big enterprise sites, large complex deployments, and kind of interesting or difficult kind of setups, or innovators in the space. So my fun fact, so it was Halloween last weekend, so I happened to, if you're going to try and do it in style, so I actually was in Transylvania, which I think I misspelled there. That's me as Joker, and my wife as Zombie Barbie. There's a video floating around on Instagram. I'll probably post it later. That's kind of what I do in my fun time. Well, or at least at Halloween anyway. Marlena's birthday happens to fall on Halloween, so you always go away every Halloween. And that's Marlena chuckling in the background. So how did we get here? What's changed with the GA4 tag within GTM? What's the benefits to kind of updating, and what does changing the G ID to GT mean, and should you or should you not do it? I generally suggest not this stage. The problems or issues to be aware of, particularly with single page applications, and also updates to content groups. User ID is also a bit of an issue, which I'm going to sort of talk about, and where you put that. Page not set issues, and just making sure your config tag fires before your events, and just trying to keep your GTM setup as lightweight as possible, and trying to avoid sort of tag sort of dependency chains. And there's some couple of kind of benefits sort of these sort of setups. So if you're used to using the GA3 settings variable, this is something akin to that now, because there's a Google config settings variable and also an event settings variable. So it's kind of shifting over from where previously you used to have to configure everything within the GA4 page view now, or tag. Now it's shifted over into a variable, which is more aligned. And also, if you're setting things like item for enhanced e-commerce or GA4 e-commerce, that's something you can now do in one event variable across a bunch of tags. So that's a benefit of this. And also, if you're doing client-side roll-ups, potentially you can also use this to standardize your setup with the GA account ID. Well, there are some nuances to that, and I've put an updated example to that in the end here. So before we're going to talk about the general stuff as to why this has happened, and then go into the detail more towards the end. And I've got a tag library which I've recently updated to all kind of GTAG examples. So that's just GTM templates.org. Or I think it is, or maybe it's .com. Let me just check. That would be gtmtemplates.org. That's got the templates in there. So yeah, Chris, if you could put that into chat, that would be great. So how did we get here? A long time ago, Google kind of obviously started off as just with Google Ads only, and then advertisers needed to know, which ads are working. You might have heard of the famous phrase, 50% of my marketing is working, but I just don't know which 50%. That's really the aim of what analytics really started with, and it basically introduced efficiencies with Google Ads. So it meant advertisers are going to spend more, and Google kind of makes more money. Then obviously we had Google Optimize, or did. Unfortunately, that's got killed off now. But that improved conversion rates, which then allowed users to spend more on Google Ads, as in their CPAs improved, and thus it allowed them to bid higher. And then Google also introduced call tracking to avoid any conversion leakage to non kind of web actions, and also integration with Google Search Console. So a standard advertiser would normally enable all of these features because, well, they're all generally free, and they support the ability to both buy ads and know what's working, know what's not working, and run an efficient campaign. But all of these are different kind of technologies. Two of them are JavaScript based. Sorry, three of them are JavaScript based here. So with all of these technologies, there was a need to consolidate and control them, especially with things like remarketing and dynamic remarketing. So hence Google Tag Manager came about to make it easier for advertisers to enable or facilitate these different technologies. So a standard advertiser should normally be using all of these, like basic kind of Google kind of tech stack, and the vast majority, as in the long tail of users, business owners, will be running on a Google stack with this type of setup, especially if they're like charities, etc. But there is a line to that. There's also medium-sized and enterprise sites where they're going to have a budget for Search Ad 360 or managing Bing ads or display ads. They're probably maybe on a paid version of Google Analytics, J360, and they may have been on Optimize 360 or have converted over to Optimizely or AB Tasty, etc. And they've probably got a DV 360 or Campaign Manager, and a means of understanding which cohorts of users are the best and most effective at going through the site or remarketing to. So there's probably some form of kind of audience detailed or granular audience measurement, such as BigQuery, or a sort of a means to control kind of user sessions on the GTN or other display networks. So now these solutions here are all paid. So you'll notice obviously Google is with these medium and larger advertisers, Google's now not just making money from ads, but it's making money from selling services, which also happen to allow the ads to run better. Again, all of these, or the majority of these, would run via Google Tag Manager or Google Tag Manager 360. So Google, in essence, as Google Ads marketing is kind of sort of flat, as in it can't really expand much more than it is. So the next route for Google to make money is going to be on paid tools and services, hence the need for Google to shift to smaller advertisers up to medium advertisers and medium advertisers up to enterprise. So they buy more tools and Google makes money from those tools. So these smaller advertisers, they're going to become medium and big players, and that's where Google's going to make its bucks, or that's the sort of premise. The problem with that approach, though, is that setting up analytics and GTM is not always that simple, especially for the smaller advertisers. They don't necessarily have an analytics agency on standby, or can't necessarily afford it, or etc. There's a need to kind of introduce something that's really basic, easy for them to enable, have decent kind of data enrichment and data collection, and do that at scale. So these smaller advertisers at least kind of automatically get upgraded to medium-sized advertisers in terms of their level of digital maturity. Although as powerful as Google Tag Manager is, you kind of need to know how to use it. So that's where the GTAG originally kind of came about, as in it had a bunch of events automatically turned on or easy to enable. So things like click listeners, history change, single page application tracking, YouTube tracking, scrollers, form submit out of the box, etc., etc. So for a small advertiser, they could just literally go tick, 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 and all of these things got enabled in one go. They didn't necessarily need to know how to configure it. And because they've then got more information, more data, understand what's working and what's not working at scale. So that's the rough kind of premise as to why this big shift has happened across to GTAG or GTAG within GTM. But there are some other reasons for that change. Because there's Google Analytics, GTM, and even Google Ads. Those technologies have been around for like 15 years or so, and lots of developers kind of involved in building them over that time. And unfortunately, not all developers in one country or in different units will talk to each other. So sometimes the left and the right arm are not always well connected, or not as well connected as they should be. So that's resulted in when you're trying to connect certain Google tools together. So, for instance, connecting Google Ads to Google Analytics, or getting a Google Ads conversion ID or conversion label. It's not a seamless process. You've got to kind of jump between tools to get it. You've got to paste an ID into GTM. Like deploy it. It's in lots of different interfaces, and that's really because of all of those tools have not all been created at the same time. So you've got to jump between those tools, and they don't like nicely or seamlessly connect between each other. So that's the other issue that Google is trying to solve, is allow an advertiser in the same way where they can easily turn on auto events by just going tick, tick, tick. They should, in Google Ads, be able to activate Google Analytics or push a conversion tag or a remarketing label without necessarily leaving the tool. So that's what Google has started to do with its kind of segments in Google Ads, which kind of pass over into Google Analytics 4. And they're a little bit more kind of seamless, but that also requires the front end technology to be able to add different code via sort of front end sort of changes. When I talk about Google to Google, that's what I mean by that, and the fact that it's not as clean or seamless as it should be, because Google developers don't necessarily talk to other Google developers because of all this technical debt built over a long period of time, and these tools created at different stages and different times. So, and you can see that from this is Google's sort of acquisition list here. This is 2005, where Google kind of bought Urchin. Wow, it shows how long ago that was. And then there was a map kind of plugin. That focus has massively shifted as Google's kind of more trying to gear towards cloud. Making money from apps and GCP rather than ads, and you can see that with these acquisitions here. The last one there being a Bard, which Google acquired. So it's got all that data from Google Analytics, Google Ads, Google Search Console, etc., which is really useful and for like mining and decision making, but it's not necessarily consolidated, and that's more of the focus that Google's kind of seems to be moving towards, and that's aligned with its revenues or on its where it said that Google Cloud is up 28%. Or 395 million, whereas the Google Ads is more kind of static in terms of growth. The other big reason for the change, and why Google's trying to consolidate these sort of front-end technologies. So if these by these users kind of moving to kind of more advanced, so in addition to advertisers kind of buying paid solutions, the other thing is there's this really kind of juicy data. There's this Google kind of Google to Google data here. So we've got Merchant Center, Google Ads, Search Console, and BigQuery, which are all kind of sitting sort of separately, but they're there's a kind of a barrier in the middle here, in the sense that these tools that with Google Analytics as an example, that can be sort of blocked or stopped. So take the example of Facebook. Where Facebook was switched to kind of opt-in mode by Apple on apps, and that caused 100% tracking to go down to like a 10% tracking. So that's a big problem with kind of CPA bidding and stuff. So the connection between that front end technology, i.e. JavaScript, and Google Ads and the Google Google Search Console and BigQuery, it's a kind of a risky connection because it's happening within the browser. But in the server, where you've got Merchant Center and Google Ads, Google has now direct integrations with things like Shopify or Salesforce, where you've got really valuable first-party data, which can flow kind of back and forth. So let's say if it's a new or existing customer, so Shopify would have that variable, i.e. they've purchased one or more orders. And that's really helpful information for bidding on Google Ads. And the same would apply if it's in HubSpot or Salesforce, where you've got the revenue of a closed lead, which is really helpful for bidding on qualified leads rather than just actual web leads. So this really juicy first party data is where Google's trying to move towards, but it has to kind of make sure that the client side tracking is robust first before trying to shift to server here. So some of those variables, as I said, new versus returning, cost of goods sold and ROI, and the cost to acquire a customer from Salesforce, those facilitate the ability for an advertiser to make more advanced bidding decisions, spend more, spend better, and spend kind of more intelligently. So that's kind of where Google wants to shift with its advertisers, and hence the shifting of client side tags first, and then next it's going to be server side consolidation. And the other advantage of server to server is that it's 100% accurate, whereas in client side you can have an ad blocker that stops 10 to 15% of traffic or transactions or conversions being sent in, which can cause CPA bidding to be reduced. So that's roughly why Google is trying to kind of shift to GTAG and later shift to server with direct integrations. But there's another big reason for the shift and the need to kind of move quickly, and why Google has sort of killed off sort of GA4 or sort of GA3 even, is that there's something taking a big bite out of Google's lunch, and affecting the data quality for both small, medium, and large advertisers. So you probably guess what it's going to be. It's not Pac-Man, it's Apple. So here's an example where Apple is either shortening cookies from 1.5 years down to 7 days, or in iOS 17 in private mode, it now strips off GCL IDs or Facebook click IDs, which is that's a big problem for tracking, and why Google wants to kind of enable enhanced conversions or email hashes rather than sort of cookies, and different kind of countermeasures to mitigate the direction that Apple is heading. And here's an example. This is from the New York Times, and if you're an iPhone, you can click on the little A box in the bottom corner, and it pops up, and you'll see a little privacy report here, and it says 5 trackers prevented. Now, I'll give you a guess as to which of those 5 are going to be kind of at the top of the list. Feel free to kind of put your comments in the chat. Unsurprisingly, it's Google Tag Manager, Google DoubleClick, Google Analytics. So Apple's pretty much got a target on Google's head, and is trying to block or prevent trackers from being sent. And obviously, if Google's relying on client-side technology, then it's difficult to stop Apple from doing that. The only thing you could do is do server to server, which Apple can't block, or use enhanced conversions and email hashes. But yeah, this is a problem because obviously Google GTM client side, that's going to be loading all of the tags here, so it's in effect going to block everything that GTM loads. Now, so Google in essence wants to have a big walled garden around this conversion data and prevent Apple from being able to kind of prevent stop conversions being sent, as in prevent what happened with Facebook, where it was dropped from 100% down to 10% kind of tracking sort of rates. And on that note, on server to server, literally in about 3 weeks ago, Google just rolled out or announced Google Data Manager in Google Ads for connecting directly to third-party tools here. So it's got Active Campaign, Zapier, obviously BigQuery there for Google, and there'll be other tools that will probably start appearing in that list as well. So this is becoming increasingly more and more the trajectory and more important to make sure you've got good first-party data, and that data kind of flowing into Google tools for good kind of ad decision making. On the other sort of countermeasures, so Google in GA4 as part of GTAG, Google automatically tries to collect an email address if it notices it entered on the page, like in a newsletter or a form field, and then it sends that as a hashed value. So that gets around cookies being blocked. And the other countermeasure I would say would be a GTM server side, which is less likely to get blocked by Apple's kind of heuristic or pattern matching detection. The GTAG really is a means to facilitate the consolidating of the vast majority of smaller advertisers, and then allow them to kind of shift into clever or more advanced kind of bidding. How it looks like in the interface. So you might be familiar with the old GA3 Google Analytics settings variable tag here. That's now changed to a config tag and an event tag. So these are the two new ones. So here we've got a GA4 sort of config tag. This one actually is sending a page view at the same time, and the variables are split now between either a configuration variable, i.e. kind of an on-load sort of parameter and value, or an event-based value, i.e. something that updates or is pushed as a user does something. So it's kind of really more like just a library and declarations, and then kind of interactions sort of separated. One suggestion or note about this, we're now also generally setting the declarations first. And then with the page view, we normally set that to false, and then would have a page view event that fires after the config tag has finished declaring. So we wouldn't normally set that to true, but that's what happens when Google has auto migrated from GA4 to GA3. You see that Boolean in the list. The other thing you'll notice on here is some of these variables have tick boxes next to them. So that means they're a whitelisted value, and you've generally put it in the right place. So on here, where I've got a content ID or content group or content type, those ones are actually more commonly put as event variables, because they're like a page kind of state or an attribute of a page. So there's not a tick box next to those. So as a rough guide, those would probably be better off moved into an event variable, which is attached to all events. With user ID, that's a bit of an interesting one. There's not a tick next to that as a default variable within the config tag, but there is within the event tag. Now, user ID, I actually recommend setting in both places. The reason for that is that the event tag takes precedence over this config tag. So if you have an on-load declaration of, let's say, user ID, and it's empty, and then someone logs in on a page and it declares or sets a user ID, that event setting for user ID will take precedence. And so here's the config tag. Also, if you move these declarations here, so for Google Ads settings and the kind of on-load configurations into a config tag, you'll see that they'll be like grayed out if they're already kind of declared in that configuration one. So you can actually easily sort of override them or see them. Also in this one, I'd recommend setting currency normally as an event tag. So you can see actually it's not ticked on there because it's normally set in event level. Yeah, so Google doesn't automatically move these fields into a configuration tag or an event tag. You've got to do it, unfortunately, which it would be nice if they did, because they've already kind of marked out the list of which should go into settings and which should go into event configurations. So with event variables, so here's event category action label. And you can see now there's ticks next to those because they're sort of set in the right place, or in this case, it's a tag that is just an event email subscribe one. And you can also set a Google event settings variable. For some really strange reason, Google have got a lowercase t on that event settings variable. I'd normally suggest setting the same names that Google picks for the defaults for these. So don't correct the case on that, keep it on lowercase. Yeah, so for things like your kind of content groups and things, those you would want to potentially put in a global event settings variable, so they're updated as on page transitions. The Google tag now allows you to set either a load either a Google Analytics tag or a G tag, as in it will start with GT. So you might have noticed on here, I'll go back a level, so that tracking ID there, that would normally be G-1234 if it was Google Analytics. But if it starts with GT, it's loading the Google tag within GTM. Or if it starts with AW, it's loading a Google Ads remarketing tag. So in order to see the GT tag, you've got to click into the Google tags within GTM, and you'll see your Google Analytics tag and your GT tag. So the two in this case are connected together. And if you change G to GT, it would then load GTM, which would then load GTAG, which would then load GA4. So it's kind of a wrapper within a wrapper. Is there any kind of speed benefit to doing this? The answer is no. It's actually the inverse, because by loading a wrapper within a wrapper, it means that the G tag actually is potentially a tiny bit slower, not by much, but so there's not necessarily a JavaScript speed benefit from making this change. But here would be the G tag as in GT and then the ID there. The benefit is more about a consolidation of your remarketing tags and also consolidation of your cookie settings. So if you wanted to globally set a Google Analytics, Google Ads remarketing and DoubleClick all to, let's say, a 1 year cookie rather than a year and a half, or you wanted to standardize them all to use the same user ID value, the G tag would allow you to consolidate those all into one thing. Sometimes you can have multiple libraries declared. So in this case, a single page application that's loaded a GTM like 4 times. And in the tag assistant, you'd sometimes see that declared kind of twice. So potentially, if you're using a GTAG library declaration, and you could set that to once per page, that helps with consolidating of a library kind of a load event, and then it's just your kind of clicks and your mail-tos, etc., which would be pushed, not like the library like 4 times. Other thing to note, so when you want to load your kind of GA4 or GTAG library, you'd want to load that first, then fire the page view second. That's to help try and avoid any page not set issues. The same issue you might have noticed on GA3, where if you had an event fire before a page view. you get like a landing page not set. Google have deployed an update literally last week with first interaction and first session, where it now actually sends the page location. So that's also helped slightly reduce the number of these not set issues. But sometimes if you do have that, you need to increase your session duration from 30 minutes up to 1 hour to prevent engagement events firing before a page view. But here, so I've split out the event tag. Here we've got the configuration, which is on once per page on a consent initialized, and I've intentionally changed it from a page loaded to consent initialized, so it runs before everything else, and then after that runs, I've got the page view tag firing as a tag sequence after the GA4 event has fired here. Now, if you've got like a hash change event, you potentially could also kind of add that as an interaction like within the page itself for that page view. So here we've got a tag sequence firing for the GA page view here, and you can just see that activating. The other kind of reason for the GTAG consolidation is that custom dimensions were not necessarily updating properly when you had updates, etc. Mainly because the set commands are sort of a bit like constants. They're not designed to be updated, whereas events potentially do update and do take precedence. So it's the GTAG is potentially more robust on single page applications with a couple of notes or exceptions. So here's an example where previously, when you're sending a page with a content group of home, and there may have been an issue where you traverse to a product page, as in clicked through, and when I talk about a single page application, I mean an instance where the content changes but the URL doesn't really change. So here you might be now viewing the product page, but in JavaScript or Google Analytics, it still thinks you're on the home page. So GTAG has some mitigating steps with event updates that make that potentially more accurate, as in it gets around this first value persistence. However, they fixed this issue. There are, however, some issues they've introduced by accident, whereby the page location still persists on outbound clicks and enhanced events. So there is a known issue that hopefully will fix, which is still an issue on single page applications. But yeah, so here's the page view with history change, hash change event here. So the library has loaded, and then we're just pushing, someone's clicked on an anchor link and then sending a virtual page view into the page location. So on that page location persistence, generally I suggest not necessarily using GA4's native history change events for two reasons. One, you can't control or set content ID, content group, and content type. And secondly, because of this known issue with the page location persistence, it's a little bit like a rogue referrer issue on GA3. But it's just not the referral, it's the page location. And if you are kind of overwriting the page location on a single page application site, you potentially need to invoke the config tag on each route change. And you need to make sure that you don't use once per page. So previously here where I was saying once per page, it would be once per event, and on sort of a history change event and a consent initialized. So generally, maybe to keep that easier or simpler, I'd still potentially suggest using GTM for history change and pop state events, just because you get that more control over content ID, content group, content type, and potentially you can get around this page persistence kind of issue. If you do use GTM for history change events, just be careful that you don't fire the page view twice on load. Especially if there's a push state change or a replace state. So just check to see that the page location is not like the same, as in only send it if it's different. So you can use a blocking rule that would potentially kind of do that. So here's an example of that blocking rule on history state changes. Here's your Google tag configuration, your event settings, and then the legacy Google Analytics tag there. And I'm going to probably jump to a live example in a minute, but I just wanted to cover the cheat sheet. So it's not always obvious as to which field should be added in what place, whether it should be a configuration or an onload event or an event configuration tag. The tick boxes kind of help because they give you a guide if it's in the wrong place, but there are some known kind of gotchas. So for instance, with the screen resolution, for some weird reason, there's no tick box on that one, even though it should always be set as a configuration tag. And also with user ID, there's only a tick box when it's sent as an event, when actually potentially you need to send it as both an event and an onload configuration. So just be aware of that particular issue with the tick box for the user ID, but you can check out this list of kind of known like incorrect kind of tick boxes in there. So for instance, campaign ID, it should have a tick box because it's a configuration event. There's no tick box. And also the new fields that Google has introduced, so source, platform, creative format, marketing tactic, those that currently don't have a tick box kind of in there where they should. So let me just pick an example on a demo here. So for instance, if I go to a config tag here, to give you an example, so I'm just going to open the config tag here, and you see that it's got a tick box next to that one where it says campaign medium, so potentially it's added in the right place. But if I then go and pick a different one, like one of the new ones, marketing tactic, Google unfortunately have forgotten to add that one, even though it should be added here. The same with user ID. It should be a tick box there, but it's not. But if it's added as an event parameter here, it does have a tick box. So that's the one exception to the rule where I'd say add it in both places, and hopefully you will update their list to kind of mark that one as it should be a tick box in both places, not just once. In terms of user properties, so Google has consolidated the onload configuration event, onload configuration variable, and the event variables for kind of clicks and updates to a page. User properties is still separated. So user properties is a thing that's really specific or unique to Google Analytics. It doesn't really apply to Google Ads or DoubleClick. So it's kind of been bolted on into GTAG. To give you an example here, so let's find, let's say, a purchase event. Yeah, here we've got new customer, true or false, and lifetime customer value, and then some other fields in here for user acquisition, CISI and state if you're for like anonymized values, obviously. So these two here, rather weirdly, these new customer type and lifetime customer value, they're really helpful fields to push into Google Analytics for analysis, as in user scoped variables. They do, however, also exist as event-based variables here. So there should be one called new customer and lifetime customer value. So these ones are a little bit weird in the sense that you potentially need to send it in two places. You need to send it to Google Analytics 4 as a user property here, and then for GTAG as in Google Ads, if you're using a Google Ads variable here, or a DoubleClick variable, or a GT, you would then set it here with those values. Yes, slight nuance to how Google have decided to do that one, but that's because these ones here are event scoped, similar to hit scoped, and then these ones here are user scoped. There's not such a thing as a user scoped field in Google Ads dynamic remarketing. And also just one other nuance, there's not a tick box for event variables if you're using e-commerce. So although you can set the item field as a global event. So for instance, let's say items here, where I'm doing a mapping of GA3 variables to GA4, and you can see the tick box next to it. There's not in this list where it's got a send e-commerce event here. This is not a setting that you can control within the event variables. So this unfortunately sits outside it. So if I go over to the event variables here, you can see there's no option to tick that box to say enable e-commerce variable if you were creating a group of event variable settings for like enhanced e-commerce, for example. So that bit is currently also sort of separated. So yeah, I don't know why Google did it in that way, but they have. The other one just to be aware of. So if you're doing any client-side roll-up, so let's say you're not on a GA360 account, and also you're not using GTM server-side, and you want to do a filtered profile. So let's say you want traffic from, let's say either a subdomain, or you want to do a top level or a brand level roll-up, a really common sort of feature request. You can do it with GTAG in client-side code. You can do it using these comma space. So here I've got G-1, G-8, and the third one with a comma space. And this is set within the configuration or the onload tag. Now, this as part of Google's kind of auto migration, Google has moved these ones over in this format. However, by doing so, they've broken client-side roll-ups for everything apart from the first configuration. So the G-1 here would send, but the other variables get ignored or dropped. So if you're doing this, unfortunately, it's broken automatically, and that's down to Google. Thanks, Google. What you've got to do to fix this is you need to split out your onload configuration from your event configurations. So this method here still does work for an event variable. Or event declaration, it just doesn't work for an onload GTAG declaration. So to give you an idea of what you need to do if you're doing a client-side roll-up, you need to do the configurations separately here. So your G-1, G-2, G-3 here. So your roll-up of everything, your brand or domain roll-up. You need to wait for those three to all fire. So do a trigger group to say, okay, these three have all executed. Like a done with config event can then be sent as a data layer, and then you can trigger your page view and the event here. This does support sending to multiple places. So it's just the config tag that does not support client-side roll-ups, unfortunately. So just yeah, be aware of that. It's a bit of a gotcha that you may encounter. But yeah, in terms of the ability to do client-side roll-ups, you can do them. If you, as I said, if you can use server-side, it's slightly better, because server-side you can just send one event and then you can route to 3 different places. But on some either banking sites or sites where they haven't set up server-side GTM, we've got to do this. So how that looks in roll-up form here, we've got the 3 configuration tags here. This one's loading as a onload initialization, and then a cookie accept action. There's a done with config, which loads after these 3. And after those 3, it then loads an all done with all config, and then after that one, it then loads the one single GA page view for roll-up, brand, country, etc. So that's the way to do it if you're doing client-side roll-ups and you want to have like a bunch of different GA4 profiles for because you can't do filter profiles in GA4. And you would also need the relevant lookup tables for those as well. I might be able to share an example of this in the template library. There's not one in there yet for this particular solution, but I'll add one later. So in summary, should you switch to GTAG within GTM? There's not any particular benefit from doing it yet, in terms of there's no new feature that gets enabled. However, in terms of consolidating your code base and picking the names of fields that Google encourages to use, there is usefulness there in terms of data standardization and like kind of data dictionary. And if you're a basic advertiser, you should definitely turn on all of those tick boxes for GTAG, as in enhanced events, apart from the form tracking one, which it generates a bunch of false positives and like counts a site search as a form submit, or a Facebook a pixel post request as a form submit. Generally Google is moving to do first-party solutions, as in first-party data, your data from Magento, Shopify, Salesforce, HubSpot, etc. That's going to be increasingly key, and that's going to and the abilities to connect that are going to be easier. But yeah, assume that Google does not yet easily connect its tools together, but it is moving in that direction. And with the Google Ads Data Manager that rolled out literally 3 weeks ago, it's starting to do that. One important note, though, is on GTM server side. Taking the example of Facebook, I would always suggest trying to run Facebook in hybrid mode, where you send a client-side page view or a client-side transaction, and also send a server-side transaction. And just dedupe based off a timestamp. The reason for that is you then get a maximum count of transactions, because you get a slight uplift, because sometimes an ad blocker could stop the client-side one being sent, but the server-side one still gets through. So generally, hybrid mode is the best way to do it to maximize conversion counts. Hopefully I haven't gone too technical on this call, but I'm just going to put a date for your diary. So Chris, if you want to sort of add this into chat, so we've got a GTM event coming up in about 4 weeks' time, called GTM Forward, full day event, completely it's free at the moment, but we may kind of cap it at a certain number of users. If you subscribe there, and you can then get full day of GTM client side, server side, and BigQuery kind of training. For the tag library, if you send an email through to hello@, I can add you to the tag library, or I'll put a link to the downloadable library, which is I'll just add the Dropbox link into chat, which is that one. So in summary, Google is trying to consolidate its client-side libraries to get better at Google to Google, to then allow server to server, which is then going to facilitate better Google Ads tracking and innovativeness. I've listed some of the known issues on here. If you're on GA360, there was a bug if you're using zones where GA4 was not in the same whitelist. That's been fixed. You can't currently fire a Google Ads or double-click conversion pixel via the G tag, which is a bit crazy, given that Google's trying to consolidate, and if they've forgotten to consolidate sale pixels, as in double-click sale tags. So it's really more about consolidating remarketing tags and the settings for those remarketing tags. You can't currently blend event variables together. So if you've got an event variable for Facebook or an enhanced e-commerce, you can't merge the two. They're individual or separated. Google doesn't clean up those variables automatically, which would be nice if they could. The user ID tick box we've just mentioned. There's a interface issue with the G number, saying you can't find it when you enter it in the event field. If you copy it twice, as in paste it in again, sometimes it shows it, but just ignore that warning if you see it. There's a the true and false, which would be a Boolean, which is a string, but a minor issue. And there's still some legacy fields from GA3, like an onoasa p, that are in that list, which are a bit pointless. Yeah, I've put a link to some other resources in there. Hopefully you've learned something new from this list, and I'd encourage you to check out the library list here that I've just posted. And I'm just going to check to see if we've got any questions. Okay, well, if you email hello at, I'll send you a link to the guide kind of after this call. Cool. Have we got any, okay, other questions? Okay, so I'm just checking the Q&A in chat. So Violet's asked, I recently transitioned to consent mode with consent banner, and sessions are down by 50%. Could it be an issue with GA4 implementation or just the usual consent percentages? Right, so if it's a 50% drop, that looks wrong. Normally it's it varies a bit between 10 and 20%. It's different per vertical. I would suggest two things. One, logging into your cookie management platform, so OneTrust CookieBot, because those will have a report of your opt-out rates. And if those say 20% in there, then clearly you've got an issue. I would say consent mode itself is quite a fiddly one to set up, and quite commonly you might have the defaults that need to be declared first, and then the updates to the defaults. So the click on accept, click on deny, or accept different options. So yeah, if you have a look at the tag library list, in there will be some examples of consent mode kind of setup. So I think there's, or maybe I haven't added it in there yet, but there should be a OneTrust. If you send an email to hello at, I can add you to the library list, and that's got a CookieBot and OneTrust configuration example, which I just haven't added into the text library yet. But yeah, as I said, that looks wrong, unfortunately. I mean, if you want to ping a link, and I can just investigate what's happening on that one, by all means do so. Curious to know, and if anyone wants to kind of jump on the stage to ask a kind of question about either GTAG within GTM, or for instance, the client-side roll-up issue, you might want to. That's an interesting one. Just on that user ID one, I actually forgot to mention that, but let's just show you an example from this is from a Slack. This is from Measure Slack. So let me just show you here. So so I was posting in Measure Slack here. This is in the GTM thread within Measure Slack. You know, where should user ID be? Should it be in config settings or shared events settings? Because it's only like marked as a tick box in the event settings, but it's confusing because your client ID is ticked in configuration settings and user ID is not. The long and short of it, so this is the problem that I'm referring to. Why is there no tick next to that? The solution or outcome really is just the fact that Google should have a tick on that, but they don't. But the key thing really is about event precedent. So this page was particularly helpful, and you can see on here it says events will take precedence over the config. So and the config takes precedence over the set command, which is just used for a user ID. So it basically, in terms of order, it goes, if you fire a user ID in a config or an empty user ID in config, and then you fire an event with the user ID populated, that one's going to be the one that trumps, and hence that's why you should add it in both places. Did anyone want to kind of jump on the stage? If so, just raise your hand and you can ask me a question in the last. Oh yeah, GTM grader thing that we just mentioned, this was a competition. We did it as part of Measure Summit, and it was to see how good your GTM account is. So it's an automatic grading. You can just upload your container, and it gives you an instant score. So these two people here got prizes for winning, and Hassan for coming second. Just as a little kind of cheat sheet thing, there's a link down here. It says links to the GTM templates, and you can actually check the score of our templates in the tool to see which one scores the best. But please check that out. There may be some useful things that you learn from that, and it will send you an email with why you scored low or things that you can do to improve the account, and it's like completely automatic. So check it out. That's pretty much everything. So as I said, just if you haven't signed up for GTM Forward, do so using the link that I've just put into chat. Oops, there we go. Otherwise, thanks everyone, and I'm just actually I'll give people 2 minutes to ask if they've got any questions. Otherwise, I'm going to go grab a cup of tea. In terms of another fun fact, I'm going to post a link. This is the video of me in Transylvania on Instagram. There's no sound on here, but it's a funny video if you want to check it out. Okay, Chris, were there any other questions that have come through to you? Oh, there's one in Q&A.
Anonymous attendee, yeah.
Okay, let's just answer this and then wrap up. If GA4 sends data to multiple destinations, so GA4 and Google Ads, still Google Ads conversion needs to be set through Google Ads GTAG, right? So it depends if you're using GTM or GTAG. You should really pick one, not both. If you're using GTM, which I would suggest because it's more powerful and better, then there's no real benefit in setting or using the GT GT tag part to send a conversion. You'd be better off just using the existing Google Ads conversion pixel. So for instance, okay, so for example here, so this is the Google Ads conversion tracking here. So this is the old template with your conversion ID and your conversion label. I would suggest just sticking to that for the moment. There's no benefit as yet to convert this one over to GTAG, and also there's no for Google Analytics tags. Google automatically converted them to GTAG. There's not been an automatic conversion from these to GTAG, and partly because you can't you can't easily control conversion pixels. So the GTAG at the moment, as in the GT part of the GTAG, is really more just for remarketing. It's not for conversion pixels. If you're not using GTM, then yes, you can send a GTAG JavaScript command for a conversion. If you're sending to so the answer basically depends on the solution that you're using. Cool. All right. Well, hopefully you've learned something from this and I haven't gone like too technical, but thanks everyone. And I said, please sign up for the event, the free event in about 4 weeks time, and cheers. All right. Bye-bye.